Told you I'd get it done this year. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Replay Mega Man Battle Network 3. In the last part we finished off the secret area, fighting off Serenade and once again fighting off BassGS in the process. And now we're back in Hades Isle because I want to make sure my extra folder is N1 folder A from this kid. Why? Because for one thing, it's got good elemental coverage, but also has two good program advances and NaviChips that I use often to begin with anyway in it. And you're going to want a lot of that for what's coming up next. You see, since we finished off BassGS and Serenade, we've now gotten our third title screen completion star. And doing so unlocks the next thing we can do back in the secret area. You may have seen them at the end of the last part, even. There are now heal navis located throughout the secret area that if you talk to them, they will allow you to start off our next completion star requirement. But before we get into that, I am equipping N1 folder A, even though you don't actually even need to equip it. As long as you have it, it'll use it. And just to showcase, this is what my Navi customizer's looking like at this point. Got some good custom programs in there. Mega Folder 1 to have more Navi chips and all that. Fast Gauge. Fast Gauge is especially going to be very useful in what's coming up here. Let's talk to the one on the bottom left first. A copy of Flashman is available for a time battle. Your current record versus Serenades is 10 seconds. You must take on this battle using your extra folder. Take the challenge. Get ready. Morph copy change. The next thing on our completion list is Navi Fight Time Trials. Any of the given heal navis in this area will throw you against one specific net nav you fought throughout the game, be it plot or optional, in usually their alpha variant, to try and beat it under a certain time frame. Going in here without thinking about your extra folder choice can be rough, but they're at least kind enough in that the various navis have various times for you to beat that are set no matter what. So Flashman will always take under 10 seconds, and since it's the Flashman Alpha, 500 HP isn't a lot to get through. However, Darkman, for instance, requires upwards of 40 seconds for you to beat because they realize that's a lot more health to get through, let alone the more complicated movement patterns. With that said, Flashman's also the only one we're showing at full speed because we've fought some of these navis upwards of 4 or 5 times on screen. We know how to deal with them, it's just now dealing with them with a set folder, effectively, that we have to worry about. In terms of the extra folders, there are 3 people usually recommend for this. The one I have, N1 folder A, which has really good elemental coverage, the 2 program advances, the 2 NaviChips I personally like, and all that. N1 folder C, that's from the scientist at Hades Isle, is also recommended by a lot of people. Because of its area grab focus, using panel out and then using snake is pretty powerful there. And then over, I'm not even sure if I ever showed this one off, there's one over in AC/DC Town from an official called the Apprentice folder. That one is arguably the best one outside of N1 folder A for my tastes, as it's got the entire Metal Man line, at least through V3. It's got prisms in there to help spread damage around. And it's got some good elemental coverage and program advances, namely I think it's got the bubble spread and heat spread program advances in there. And the extra air shots it has, if memory serves, makes for pretty easy moving through the folder in a single pace, rather than trying to wait for damage and all that. But at the end of the day, it really is your own preference on top of worrying about your own NaviCust stuff. Having ways to charge your buster more quickly if your more focus is really good there. I would really just recommend ways to get through your folder more quickly so you can get the chips you really like. But there are always going to be bosses in this that are worse than others, especially depending on what the elements of your style change are. For instance, Bubble Man himself is always kind of annoying as it is, but as a heat team style, I take a lot of damage very quickly from him, so watch out if you're any kind of heat style, for instance. On my first playthrough of the post-game, I wasn't a big fan of the time trials, and I'm still really not now. I get why they're here, because they make for a good, interesting near-final challenge in terms of, alright, you've made it through all this making your own folder, now fight these versions of them with a set folder and see how well you'll react and use your other mechanics as best you can. And that's a cool idea, but I think the best way to put it is there's a reason this is effectively the only game to do something exactly like this when it comes to this mechanic. There's things that are close to the boss refights in this regard, but they're not exactly analogs at the same time either, so it's not really one-to-one. Moments like this, you can really tell they were trying to get the most out of this specific game, considering it was originally supposed to be the last game in the series. Because they never bring this back, they kind of bring back the Virus Breeder, except not really in a later game. This really feels like they were throwing everything at the wall to try and make this feel like the ultimate battle network, in terms of the challenges they threw at you. And there's something valid to that, I think. But in a world where 4 through 6 definitively exists, it makes this kind of feel very weirdly weighted in terms of what it's trying to throw at you, compared to earlier and later games. Albeit, I'll still give it this. I would rather do this than some of the stuff in 4 and 5's post-games, but those are very small things compared to this. Because I think recording-wise, doing this with failed attempts included was about an hour and a half, 2 hours, just about. Because there were a lot of times where I would just load into the fight, get a bad starting layout, and just do a soft reset and all that. But I've been doing that throughout the LP. My final gameplay time at the end of this LP is close to 50 hours. I can tell you for a fact, counting soft resets, it's probably closer to 70. Battle Network post-games definitely start getting beefy starting in this compared to 1 and 2's. But I do think they do a better measure of what that time is spent doing, at least in 5 Beyond more accurately than 4 Beyond, because 4 has its own share of questionable decisions for what they want you to do in post-game. So does 5 for that matter, but in a much looser way than 4. Ugh. Now, something to keep in mind when it comes to the Navis themselves in this. They are actually laid out in a way that I find very satisfying. Every time trial here in Secret Area 1 is a World 3 Navi. Secret 2 is entirely the friendly Navis, so Gutsman, Kingman, Bullman, things of that nature. Meanwhile, Secret 3 is the post-game exclusive Navis, so Darkman, Japan Man / Yamato Man, and Proto Man, especially. If I had to, like, point at 3 specific problem fights no matter what here in these time trials, though, they're probably Drill Man, because unless you bring Break Charge in, you're going to have very limited ways to take care of the drill in front of him to deal damage or stun him. Flame Man, because of his beefy HP as it is, but also his very random candle, so he'll either start regenerating HP or become invincible for a period, which could get in the way of the timer. And out of at least the post-game Navi's Proto Man, just because of his pure speed. Thankfully, I think at least one of the N1 folders has at least a good amount of area grabs, so you can, like, area lock them around in such a way where you might have less issues. That is especially useful in the case of Flame Man, as, and I forget if I ever mentioned this, a thing with Flame Man's battle is that he'll actually never go to the far back center panel between the 2 candles. He'll only stay on the row in front of that. So you can really lock him into a corner and just make him unable to do anything, and you can take out one of the candles at the same time as damaging him in some cases as well. Mind you, there's cases where that can backfire, because say if you hit the candle and him, and then the candle turns into the invincibility one, you might have some problems there, potentially. Similarly, Metal Man and Kingman can also cause some issues, as their extra barriers in the way of the chest pieces or the metal gears means some damage meant for the bosses might get absorbed into them instead, and on a time limit, that's especially rough. Thankfully, and this is a very key thing about these time trials, busting rank doesn't exist or matter. So use an opportunity to get a little greedy and maybe take a hit while dealing damage to the boss fight, and that'll help you a lot. Unlearning that specific thing for these time trials in specific is arguably one of the hardest parts of it on a first run. So keep that in mind, and honestly, that'll probably help boost you along at least 1 or 2 of the fights, I would guess. Now, of course, depending on which version you're playing, one of these time trials is going to be different. Here in Battle Network 3 Blue, we're going to have to fight Bullman. Over in BN3 White, you're going to be fighting Mistman here. But I believe they have the same timer, so don't worry too much about it. Due to the time trial nature of this, though, I will say it's very easy, especially on a first run, to get impatient and worried about the timer and try to rush through your attacks and miss because of that. Actively make sure you take the time to aim properly with your battle chips. Pause buffering helps here more than a lot of other places, because it really does help you nail in positioning in a way where it's easy to get around that while keeping in mind the timer still. That's everything here in Secret Area 2, so we just need to get to the end of Secret Area 3 to take care of the final 3. My recommendation for these last 3 is to take care of the one on the top left first, because all 3 are over by where we fought Serenade. Then go down to the bottom right, because that will be Darkman, Japan Man, and Proto Man in order. And honestly, you really should save Proto Man for last, because he is rough. Something to note, I don't think I did about Darkman earlier in the LP, by the way, is if you area lock him, you actually can make him a little bit more dangerous on accident, in that he only changes his element for his attack between the Fire Tower, the Killer Eye Laser, or the Snowflake from the Pengus whenever he moves. So if you lock him into one place, you might get yourself into a situation where moving in front of him at all could be a death sentence, so watch out for that. It's especially worth noting if you're weak to any of those 3 elements, which odds are, given the 3-to-1 ratio there, you probably are, and even then, the one that you would be is Elec-type styles, and in that case, you have an entirely different debuff with arguably the worst charge shot out of the set. Japan Man does have something you should watch out for as well, and that's not only the fact that his backup can steal back the panels you steal with any kind of area steals, meaning area denial is not a good strategy against him, but you need to really watch out for the attack where he reflects your attack back at you. Similarly, I probably should mention this earlier, you really should watch out in the time trial against Plant Man for the Leaf Shield, as if you heal his HP too far back up, you could be looking at a pretty nasty time loss there. At the end of the day, these can be frustrating just straight up, largely because the folders they give you that you can use for the extra folders aren't always going to be what you like to use in terms of strategy and all that, so you really have to kind of leave your comfort zone for this, and there's a part of that that can make this really annoying, but there are much harder things to do in the series on the whole. There's much longer things to do in the series on the whole, and at the end of the day, if you got this far, you can do it, even if you have to readjust how you want to do it. With that said, we're now on to our final one, Proto Man. One of the things I really also like about N1 Folder A that comes into handy in this fight especially is, since it has the Lance battle chip, it has inherently a pretty high damage way to damage anything in the back row, even if you don't have a way to necessarily access them. And we're done! Time to deletion, 1778. Well done, you set a new record for Proto Man. Now hold every record. Here, a gift from Serenade, and that gets us our next Giga Chip, Dark Aura. Time battles are available at any time. Notably, over in Battle Network 3 White, you get the Serenade battle chip here, which is kind of annoying that Battle Network 3 Blue doesn't actually get a battle chip that represents Serenade directly, but oh well. So Dark Aura does what it says on the tin. It's another Aura battle chip, but it's a dark chip technically, so it requires having a hole on the field that's active in order to actually use it. With that said, it'll protect you from any shot that does less than 300 damage, which aren't impossible to find, but they're rare enough where you're going to be effectively untouchable to most enemies. You just have to dedicate a 15th of your library to it. But if you combine this with Sanctuary, things need to do 600 damage to touch you, which is a little ridiculous to say the least. I also like how it looks. The black and white flashing barrier with the white trailing energy, that's cool as hell. Notably though, Dark Aura / Serenade isn't all you get for completing the time trials. If you now go back and check your title screens, we have now earned our 4th completion star. And this is where a lot of people will probably stop playing for good reason. To get anything else, you need to interact with the opposite version. Hence, now it's time for us to go take a look at Battle Network 3 White. Now, I'm not showing everything in the game. Compared to Battle Network 4 Beyond, the differences between the two versions of Battle Network 3 are shallow at best, and I didn't want 100% the game again up to this point for about 10 minutes of footage or so. So I've actively downloaded a save file for this and loaded it into my emulator. In specific, this is the save file by Bellius on GameFAQs from July of 2017. Kind of annoying thing about downloading save files for Battle Network, by the way, is that they'll often just put the two versions save files together when they're not actually compatible with each other. I had to search for one that was 100% while also being on white. So we've covered some of the differences between the two versions already, namely every set encounter in the game against random viruses is changed up a little bit, on top of the fact that Boltman and Mistman are different. But one of the larger set of differences is actually minor visual things, namely the menus are different colors and also various sprites are changed around. For instance, over on Lance table in blue, it's chocolate cake, but over here in white, it's strawberry shortcake. Here in Mail's room, the statue is different. Over in blue, it's Roll Casket from Legends 2. Over here in 3 white, it is Tronbon from Legends. But also, over here where Mr. Famous is, we got someone else. What's going to happen to the world? I can't stand this. Maybe talking will help ease my fears. I didn't know this, but I hear that some viruses use support chips like Area Grab. Hope I don't run into any like that. Mr. Famous himself is not in 3 white, instead his assistant is here, which notably means Punk's battle, as well as his battle chip, is technically blue exclusive in that regard. Though I believe you can still use the code to get Punk in white in the case you want to. Next up, let's talk about the difference I've talked about probably the most throughout the LP, Mistman. Over Battle Network 3 Blue, we fought Bullman several times to get his 4 battle chips, but we got Mistman over here in white, so let's showcase him. Do you think you're strong enough? They do serve the same plot role, by the way, as they're both just rank 2 in the rank battle stuff. I will spar with you anytime you wish. Come when you need. Mistman's a little interesting in that you're more fighting his lamp than he himself. The lamp will move about randomly on the field like a normal boss fight will, but whenever it moves, Mistman will appear after a moment in front of it. If you're in the same row as it when he fully appears, he tackles across the screen trying to physically damage you. The lamp is very open during this, but notably, Mistman himself does count as a hitbox that can block attacks, so using things like Beastman can be a little iffy here. This is Navi Recycle, by the way. I've talked about this several times already. This is the Giga Chip in Battle Network 3 White that replaces Folder Back over at the Bug Frag Trader in the one part of Undernet 2. And it's much better because it just recalls the most recently used Navi, as well as certain really powerful program advances, namely Bodyguard, which makes it overall the better option. In fact, White, on the whole, I think does have better Giga Chips, and I'm going to be showcasing them all just to be complete with it. Mistman has two other attacks of note. One is Poison Mist, where he'll spawn various poison clouds on either side of the field that if you step into will just do poison panel damage, effectively slowly sapping away your HP. But if you're a column in front or behind one, he'll pop out of it to try and punch you in the face or in your back. And the last one is Soul Gang, where he's going to summon two ghosts that sort of act like the bubbles from Bubbleman's fight, in that they'll track around you and follow you around. But if you get caught by one, it keeps you in place for a moment, leaving you very open for Mistman's own tackle attack. That about wraps up Mistman, though. I think he's the easier fight compared to Bullman, but I think Bullman's higher energy makes him the more interesting fight. While we wrap it up, though, some other differences between the two versions I should note. Shop inventory is slightly shifted. What chip codes enemies can drop is different. And also, obviously, I've already briefly talked about it. There's a different style change in each game. Battle Network 3 Blue gets Shadow style. Battle Network 3 White gets Ground style. I'm not showcasing them or Bug style in this LP because that would be just way too much grinding that I don't care to really do. For more information on what the shop stock differences are and what viruses will drop what codes and what version, I have placed a link in the description to the version differences page from Rockman.exe zone. So let's talk about Mistman's battle chip. He spawns various poison mist clouds across the enemy field and will punch enemies next to them. I do believe he likes to home in, but I rarely use him because I mostly play blue, so I'm not entirely on the know about that. Next up, let's talk about some of the Giga Chips over in 3 White that we've gotten the equivalents of over in 3 Blue. Namely, instead of Base Plus from BassGS, you get the Base Battle Chip. It still requires a Dark Hole to be open to use, but instead of being the Earthbreaker attack that Base used in that boss fight, it's instead his usual Buster Rake that goes across the 3 rows in front of you. Which means if you're on the top and bottom, you only do 2 rows. Technically weaker, but it can do more hits against a wider variety of foes in the case of virus battles. I do prefer Base Plus in that regard, though. Next up, instead of Dark Barrier, we actually get Serenade, which is kind of absurd, especially given how good its coding is. Like with Base, still requires a Dark Hole to be open, but when you use it, Serenade spawns in and does the attack that leaves them open during their boss fight, which will shock and break enemy panels and damage any foes on them. And if you reduce the amount of panels there are, you hit the foe more often. So if you can area deny and use this, it's really good. Even though there's very few opportunities to use it left in the game at this point unless you do a lot of net-linked battling. Speaking of which, because getting 100% requires trading between the two versions, it's time for us to look at the network features. Notably, any battle chips you can get through this that are exclusive to one version or the other in the Wii U release, just accessing the network menu will give you. First off, I want to trade over from 3 White the 4 Mistman chips you can get, versions 1 through 4, over to my 3 Blue save file for the main LP. Trading itself works the same way it did back in 1 and 2. You select a chip, the other person selects a chip, and you trade it, plain and simple. It's like Pokemon. Though I believe this game is the one that added the option to trade no chips at all. Now, notably, this is required in order to get the completion star for getting every single Mega class chip in the game, as Mistman or Bullman versions 1 through 4 can only be gotten through the opposite version, barring the Wii U thing I talked about a moment ago. This is the only Battle Network that gives the opposite version exclusive chips that much weight. Battle Network 4 Beyond would rule opposite version exclusive chips as secret chips, which are their own category that usually have their own completion mark but doesn't hold nearly as much weight in most cases. With that said, I should note, just to say it here, I'm showcasing Battle Network 3 White this way only because the differences are so shallow. Battle Network 4 Beyond, because of how much more in-depth the version differences are, I am actually going to effectively be recording both versions to do so. With that said, I'm probably going to focus on the main version and then go over to the other version to showcase that stuff in that order rather than recording them both at once like I know some people do. With that said, my main goal here is just to get Mistman versions 1 through 4 over, as well as Sonic Wave W, actually, because then I can complete the last NPC chip trade. And just to showcase, now that we have all 4 of those, we have 85 Mega Chips, and if we do a soft reset, we now have all 5 of the main completion stars. But we're still not at 100%. Namely, our next focus is going to be on multiplayer net battling. Like in Battle Network 2, there are battle chips exclusive to doing real battles with someone else. With that said, they've immensely lessened the load of them. In Battle Network 2, there were 10 battle chips you got randomly from doing this. Here in Battle Network 3, there is a Giga class chip per version that you get once per save file by doing this. Net battles themselves function about the same way they did in Battle Networks 1 and 2, only now you have to keep in mind not only your folders and styles for any strategies, but also the Navi customizer, which adds a lot of spice to this. And honestly, having done some real fights myself, it can get really hectic and really fun. The matches themselves go up to 15 turns using the custom screen as a turn ender, and the winner steals a battle chip from the loser. The weight classes we saw a moment ago determine effectively two things: the arena layouts and what you can win. Lightweight has 4 total layouts, midweight has 32, and heavyweight has 17, while tri-battle is just a best 2 out of 3 match that pulls from all 3 level sets. Notably though, the version-exclusive Giga class chip we're doing this for can only be won on midweight or above, and I've also seen some people say you need at least 2 completion stars for that. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, because I always have at least 3 or 4 by the time I do this anyway. As for how the drop rate of the version-exclusive Giga class chip works, that's a little in-depth, and what I'm about to say is largely paraphrasing information on the Rockman.exe zone. Effectively, as long as you're on midweight or above, class-wise, there's a 1 in 32 chance, so around 3%, that instead of stealing a chip from the loser, the winner instead gets a reward chip gifted to them by the game. The game generates that chip by comparing the libraries of the contestants playing, with the notable exception of virus breeder chips. If both players' libraries are full, you get the Giga class chip. If they're not, then it gets a little more complicated. The game then selects a chip missing from your library at a rarity based on the winner's busting rank, where in effect ranks 1 to 3 get 1-star rarity chips, busting rank 4 gets you 1 or 2-star rarities, busting rank 5 gets you 2 or 3-star, busting rank 6 gets you 3-star guaranteed, busting rank 7 gets you 3 or 4-star rarities, and anything level 8 or above busting rank wise gets you a 4-star rarity. If no chips are found missing from your library at a specific rarity, the game will decrease the rarity it's looking at until it finds a missing one, and if none are found at that point, it goes up from there. So if you have your full library at this point, getting the Giga class chip is pretty much guaranteed, and I do appreciate that. It's a lot easier to get these chips than it was the secret chips in Battle Network 2. With that said, still kind of annoying that you have to do this at all to get everything, but it's not a big deal. It's the Pokemon thing. It doesn't bother me that much. Helps that there's not actually technically a completion star directly tied to getting every Giga class chip in this game. Because we already have 5, and what remains in the game doesn't require getting all of them to begin with. Also, notably, if you're playing the Legacy Collection release of either Battle Network 3, they simplified this further. In that, it's just the 1 in 32 chance for the Giga class chip. Standard class rewards are completely removed from play, and honestly, I'm really glad about that because it makes this a lot easier to sit through. People who watched my Battle Network 2 redo LP I did that preceded this one will know that I went through some hell to get all 10 secret chips there. I'm glad they streamlined this a lot for BN3, even if it's still here. And BN4 Beyond streamlines it even more, thankfully. So over here in Battle Network 3 Blue, the Giga class chip you can get from net battling is Delta Ray, so Delta Ray Edge in specific. Meanwhile, over in 3 White, it is Balance. We're going to showcase them both really quick, but first off, and I completely forgot to do this in the main recording session, I gotta trade Sonic Wave W over to my blue file, so we can finally go get Elect Sword P from the NPC over here at the school. Not that I need it for anything, but it's the last chip trade remaining in the game, so I might as well, you know? So we're going to start off by showcasing Balance. Balance is a Giga chip that's definitely more meant for multiplayer than it is for single player, but you can still use it in single player. What it does is that it halves the HP of everything in the battlefield, including you. There are times it can be useful even in single player for some of the super boss level things, as it does still work on things like BassGS and all that if you go out of the way to go get that first. But I don't really care to use it because I would have to do the multiplayer to get it anyway, so not exactly usually in the top of my mind. Delta Ray Edge, on the other hand, is much more my style, but it's really tricky to use correctly. When you use it, Proto Man teleports in and does a slash, but if you press the A button after he slashes but before he teleports away, you can get upwards of 3 strikes with it for 660 total damage before attack boosting. It's really powerful, but the timing on that is incredibly precise compared to anything else in the game, to the point where it can be kind of unwieldy, honestly. With that said, I am using it against Gutsman for a reason. I am once again grinding Gutsman beta for bug frags. Namely, I want about 500 or so from him, just to go clean out the last shop in the game with the bug frag trader over in Undernet 6. I don't need to do it, I just feel better actually doing it. Technically speaking, I still don't have every program because that requires maxing out all technically 6 styles exclusive to your version, but that's a lot of battles I just don't feel like doing. There are full lists of the programs you can find of game facts or on Rockman.exe zone for what programs drop by which style change and how to get them. So if you're looking for a specific one, do that. Admittedly, there's more reason to do that nowadays than back when, because the online multiplayer within the Legacy Collection can lead to you actually being able to use them more reasonably, but not to my taste. Also, hey, I maxed out Team Style. Nice. Special shout-out to this bug frag trader, by the way, goes to Buster Max, which does what it says on the tin. It maxes out your Buster stats, so if you use the Mega Buster more than I do, feel free to use that. It's pretty good. With that said, from here is where things get pretty weird for the post-game, as I'm not actually sure how people discovered how to do this. But if you look at our save file, we're not at 100% yet. We have every standard Omega class chip, but not every Giga class. In order to get the rest of the Giga class chips, we need to go back to the title screen. When here, press Start, and then highlight the Continue option. While highlighting it, hold left on the D-pad, and while doing so, do the following inputs on the shoulder buttons. RR, LR, LR, LL. Doing so will take the 5 completion stars we have here on the title screen and compress them. There is now room for 2 more. We're not done yet. In order to get the next 2 completion stars, we need to scour across the in-game internet world in search of hidden encounters. Namely, one in just about every plot scenario computer and a couple across the various internet. In specific, we want to start by heading over to Principal Computer 2 and head towards the internet equivalent of the data server over in the Teacher's Lounge. Head south and save right around here, as around here is a block that is now a set encounter that is 4 battles in a row. The first 3 are all against Omega level viruses, so you are gonna be in for a battle. With that said, with what you have at this point for your folder, these fights can be rough, but they're very easily fought off. High-level NaviChips, high-level program advances, even good Navi customizer setups can really trivialize a lot of these fights. But our main reason for doing this is the 4th encounter in the set. Doing so is going to nab us one of our remaining Giga Chips. And there are a lot of these Giga Chips to grab. We're about 27 minutes into the video right now. We're doing this for about the next 26 or so we're gonna be here for a long haul. With that said, this is the only set of 4 battles I'm showing at full speed, as if I did them at full speed the entire time, I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying this, there would probably be enough footage that I probably could do an entire 16th episode on that alone, plus the thing we do after that. So you might be noticing a theme with these viruses. They were all like Elemental. That's because at the end of every set of 4 battles is an Omega Navi fight, the strongest variant of every boss Navi in the game. With that said, pattern-wise, they're not that different from their beta release. They're just stronger and faster and beefier. For instance, here with Flashman Omega, his Neon Light attack does about 100, his Spark Arm does about 150, and his Flash will do the Paralyze effect as well as 100 damage. Expect effectively every attack from one of these guys to do a multiple of 100 damage, to the point where, if memory serves, roughly 60 to 70% of them have an attack that does 300 damage, not counting elemental bonuses at that point. So if you're playing Battle Network 3 Blue in specific, these Omega Navi fights are a very good opportunity to break out the combo I brought up earlier in this video of using Dark Hole, Dark Aura, and Sanctuary to keep yourself alive. But keep in mind as well that we're playing these like the time trials. There's no busting rank involved in what rewards you get. You always get the version 5 Giga Chip of a NaviChip from beating an Omega Navi. So if you need to, play a little recklessly. Take a dumb hit here and again if it guarantees you're doing more damage to them than they are to you. It's a valid strategy here, especially against some of them like Bubble Man or Flame Man or anyone who has an elemental type that you might be weak against, as ultimately it might be what saves you. With that said, we're going after the Omega Navis in order of the story fight. So now that we've done Flashman, we're going after Gutsman here over in Dex's homepage. I do like that they ultimately theme the viruses around the boss fight in question, as it does add a little personality, but also in some cases it actively leads to the preceding fights to the Omega Navi more dangerous than the Omega Navi in question, depending on your style change or otherwise setup. For instance, I think the Omega viruses here are more dangerous than Omega Gutsman, as well he's got some power behind him. He's still Gutsman, so you know how to fight him at this point. I'm personally, though, not too sure how people found out about these. I'm assuming similarly to some of the compression codes and mod tool stuff. There's just hints of it in not only the anime, but probably also in some direct promotional material for the game. And since that was probably Japan only, we just know about it from probably strategy guides and the like. It's a neat idea, but it definitely makes the NaviChips and the GigaChips themselves feel very much like an afterthought because you can only get them and use them in very specific fights, ultimately. But it makes for a cool final challenge all the same as a potential, like, final game in the series sort of thing. One final lap destroying the most powerful versions of things is satisfying at the end of the day. Even if the search for them isn't, at times, worth it, it feels like. For instance, here with Beastman, we have to go over to the Zoo computer, but we need to go all the way into Zoo Computer 3 to find him. And I'm like, they probably could have just placed him in Zoo Computer 1, but at the same time, that's largely because by the end of the game, I'm really sick of Zoo Computer in specific because of how many times you have to go deep into it for main story or side quests alike. Now, if there was a very good reason to actually use Gigafolder 1 from Undernet 7 in your Navi customizer setup, it probably is the version 5 Navi GigaChips, as their power upgrades are pretty notable in some cases, even if they're ultimately pretty small upgrades. For instance, I end up running Beastman V5 for a little bit here in the next couple of fights, as while it's only an increase of 10 damage per shot because of the button mashing ability to get more damage in on Beastman, that 10 really builds up quickly. But the one I end up running more often than not towards the end of these fights is actually going to be Bubbleman version 5, as the increased amount of hits on that specific battle chip on top of like using Navi plus 40, Navi plus 20, attack plus 30, leads to that being a particularly devastating battle chip. Bubbleman V5 is in kind of an annoying location though, pretty suiting for Bubbleman himself, as he's at the end of a very small pathway that still requires the press program, so one of 2 more required uses we need to use of that throughout the LP. I'm sick of swapping that in and out at this point, and if you're playing along, you probably are too. If there's one of many things I'm glad they learned to stop doing in Battle Network 4 Beyond, it's required NaviCust programs. Largely, it'll just be a key item moving forward again, thank God. Just to shout out specific damage values, by the way, because I'm Heat Style, the shot that Bubbleman does out of his bubble in the later part of his health bar will do about 600 damage to me, so yeah, these fights are out to kill you. Though it's very easy because of that to fall into a pattern of just using like Bodyguard in these to keep them stunned in one place and all that, and honestly, at this point, considering how much damage they do, it's very easy to stop feeling bad about just using the one strategy over and over again. Next up, we actually want to go into the TV board computer, because down here at the bottom left is where we're going to fight our Kingman Omega setup. As soon as I find him. Hello? Where are you? There you are. These set encounters are weirdly precise in that they're very easy to find in their area, but I can never quite nail the exact location of them sometimes. I guess the best way to compare what I'm saying is, finding the version 2 Navis and set locations throughout the internet is a relatively wide hitbox at the end of those pathways. It feels like sometimes the hitboxes for these set encounters is like a third of that size, even though it's probably actually the same size, they're just in wider areas in comparison. So Kingman version 5 is interesting, in that if you use either him, Bullman V5, or Mistman V5 after using Team 1 and Team 2 asterisk, we get to do the final program advance in the game, pre-power. Why those 3? Well, not only are they in the N1 Grand Prix, but also they were designed by fans. Mistman will be fired out of Bullman's gun down the different rows, each hit doing 300 damage, and then Kingman will slam down the center of the enemy field, which will also do damage to the surrounding plus shape of panels for roughly 600 total. It's powerful, but honestly, at this point, you probably have better options or cooler options to begin with. But that means we've now done all 32 program advances, so if we do a quick save and soft reset, we have now gotten our 6th completion star, only 1 left to go, and we're quickly marching toward it all the same. Next up, we want to head over to the TV van that's out in front of the TV station, as our next Omega Navi lies within it in the eastern corner. And because we're back at DNN, you can guess one of 3 people, and you'll probably be right about who this is. It's time for Desert Man Omega's fight. Thinking about it, in a way, they kinda revisit this concept a little bit in BN5's post-game, but they handle it, I think, much better there, because for one thing, all the fights are much closer together, but also, if memory serves at least, you don't necessarily have to fight them all, or at least you have better options to deal with them, because you don't have to do virus battles before them either. But I'll largely save talking about that for whenever I get to 5's post-game, and I'm gonna make an estimate of at least 2 years. Not because of 1 per year per game, but because I want to do something else before I get to Battle Network 4, but I'll save that topic for the credits of this post-game in specific. Also, there absolutely are better folder setups for basically any given Omega fight. I wouldn't be surprised if there's guides on, like, GameFAQs or NeoSeek or something like that that's, like, specific strategies for specific Omega Navis and their preceding viruses. But at this point, I won't lie, I was very burned out of playing the game. So, I really just relied on bodyguards, do hero. I probably could have even done double hero, and whatever else I have in my folder to just do as much damage as I can in a shorter time span. And it's efficient, I'll give it that. But I understand to some people it probably use the same strategy over and over again in a game like this. Probably gets boring after a little bit. Though I'll definitely give this series this. It definitely gets a lot better about placing its more powerful options towards endgame or postgame as you go into the series. As, while there's still powerful program advances early on in this, like you can still get gut shoot relatively early. No program advance in the series ever truly reaches the heights of BN1 gut shoot or Gator in BN2 again. Bodyguard's probably the closest on the whole, but that's not as ridiculously individually powerful as Gator was. Plantman V5 out of the way over here in Hospital 3. Now we're actually back over at the Undersquare, because our next destination is Flame Man Omega over right next to where we first fought him in the storyline here in Undernet 3. Or is this Undernet 4? I've already lost track. The search for the Omega Navis can at times be the worst part if you don't want to use maps or look up where they are, as, well, they're usually close to where their boss fight was or tied to their original fight location in some form. Combing over every area's individual panels can get to be a nightmare, but I do gotta say it is satisfying just going from one to the other, slowly seeing that gigachip count raise, because you just get them all in such short sequence. In that regard, it's actually one of the few times there's technically a gigachip grind in 3 Beyond, because largely BN4, My Memory Beyond, do better about pacing out the pace at which you get gigachips in the post-game, where it's not like, alright, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's more like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's ultimately better for the feel of it, I think. So our next destination is over back where Bowl or Mistman are, and we want to head towards the southeast corner, as that is where our Bowlman refight is. Oh, actually, on that note, I probably should mention this, actually. While largely in the campaign and side quests up to this point, the set virus encounters we've done have been changed around depending on the version you're playing, where, like, the key virus is shifted around, or the accompanying viruses are different. The Omega viruses you fight leading up to an Omega Navi, I believe, are consistent between the two versions, so it's the same experience in that regard. On that note, though, talking about, like, how they cut down on gigaships moving forward in BN4 Beyond, they also cut down on the amount of NaviChips per Navi to begin with, back down to 3, as with Battle Network 1 and 2, and honestly, that is for the better. 5 versions of any given NaviChip is too many, I think, for practicality purposes. While the increasing damage is nice, there's better ways to deal with that. So we got Bullman V5 and I jacked out, but I jacked back in for a very specific reason. We're not done here yet. There's not one, there are 2 set virus encounters here that lead to an Omega Navi. Why? Well, I was very deliberate in my wording a few moments ago. Bullman is always in the bottom right corner of the map there. Because over here in the top left corner is always Mistman. No matter what, there is technically always a way to fight Mistman or Bullman in the opposite version, just that it's locked behind the Omega Navis. Which means you need to have traded over the battle chips anyway, but at least there's a way to do it. Next up, we're heading after Drillman, I believe, who's over back where his initial encounter was back during the main plotline. Now, off the top of my head, I want to say they do throw every single Omega virus variant at you as you go through the journey for every single Omega Navi. But if there's a virus to look out for, at least until you reach the secret area exclusive viruses, it's whenever a Momogra Omega shows up in these, as really, you don't want to risk them hitting you in the back of the head. And obviously, like, you don't want to get hit by the viruses to begin with, but my recommendation whenever one of them shows up is to just stay in the back row and use attacks that can hit them no matter what. Like, the Metagel attacks can hit them no matter what, Bodyguard can pierce them pretty easily. It'll be a slow fight to do it that way, but trust me, the safety and higher HP for the Omega Navi is worth the slowness. Once Drillman's out of the way, though, I'm kind of going to break the order I've done up to this point, because if memory serves at least, well, the way I did this post-game is I did Darkman and Japan-Man first before going after Proto-Man. I'm going after Proto-Man Omega first, as to smoothly end out the Omega Navis, you really do just want to get everything done in the secret area done on one trip. So if I get him done first, I can then go after the remaining Navis all in the secret area in a straight row. Now, I've been saving before every single one of these fights anyway, and I do generally just recommend that, but if there's a set I definitely recommend saving before, it is definitely Proto-Man's virus set as well. As he starts off with the Team 2s, which is kind of annoying in its own regard. With that said, Proto-Man Omega is definitely one of the more dangerous fights, if only because, get this, it's Proto-Man, so he's extraordinarily fast and powerful. With that said, as long as you're not having to worry about busting rank, you can take a couple more cheap shots along the way just to help get his health a little more down. I debated either using Giga Folder 1 or just swapping my Bubbleman version 5 out for Proto-Man V5 as well, because I think you can also still use him for the Double Hero Program Advance. But I'd rather have the multi-hit nature of Bubbleman or even Beastman V5 around, as when partnered with attack plus chips, that is just so much more devastating than the single swipe that Proto-Man ultimately does, against boss fights at least. On virus battles, honestly, Proto-Man V5 is really good. So now we're finally in the secret area, so it's time for us to go after the secret area Navi Omegas, and we're going after Darkman first. They do place them effectively in every single respective area. This is a particularly dangerous set of viruses, only because they throw Shadow Omegas in here, but as long as you even have just a variable sword or two in your folder, you'll be fine. I also want to say we actively get to see Darkman use his little Shadow buddy this time around, because I don't think we've seen him do that up to this point. It's definitely a Shadow virus. There's easy ways around it. Really would get more in the way of the step count potential, but not a big deal at the end of the day, especially considering it usually spawns so late into his health bar. Doesn't get to do much. Next up, we're going after Yamato Man / Japan Man, and to fight him, we need to get actually back over towards where we got, I believe that was Anti-Recover? Back in the little hidden panel on the very top of the map. Despite the obvious usual damage buffs and all that, I honestly think Yamato Man Omega is honestly easier than Yamato Man Beta. If only because I don't have to worry about busting rank as much, so I can take my time and avoid the counterattacks a little more easily. Backup can still be a problem, admittedly, but there are far, 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 far worse Omega Navis that we've fought. In fact, there's far, far, far worse ones we've yet to face, technically speaking. Now, there's a lot of potential problems with doing an LP for as long as this one's been going on, like an entire year-long game. And a lot of that comes down to, I forget if I brought up certain topics or not, but if I haven't brought it up, I love Yamato Man's design in Battle Network. I love all the Battle Network updates / alternate versions of Robot Masters to begin with, but generally speaking, I think the Mega Man 6 representations throughout the series got some of the best stuff. Same with Mega Man 2, for that matter. With Yamato / Japan Man out of the way, it's time for us to go over to Secret Area 3 and deal with our last Omega Navis. Namely, we want to head back up towards where Serenade was. Well, I think you can see where this is going. Fight Serenade Omega. And while with the exception of Flashman, I've sped up every Omega Navi and its viruses up to now, I'm only going to be speeding up the viruses for the remaining ones because we've fought these entities few enough times where having it at full speed for demonstration's sake is still pretty handy. With that said, the final couple of Omega Navis just throw straight up scuttle viruses at you more often than not in the virus lead up, and that can be pretty dangerous, let alone alpha bugs, but you have plenty of damage potential you can use at this point, so just use it whole hog. Serenade Omega can fall into the same trappings as standard Serenade, where just trapping them in a corner can just completely destroy the boss fight's main mechanic. So I'm still going to use it, but the damage upgrades on top of how much HP you might have drained from you on the lead up to this fight are worth noting, because that can really make or break how well this fight goes for you. Let alone the fact we're very regularly hitting over 2400 HP on a lot of these Omega Navis at this point. You got a lot to get through. Mind you, without the time trial time limits to worry about or busting ranks, you can just Mega Buster that down a lot more safely from a distance if you want to. And I think on my first playthrough, I ended up doing that for a couple of these because my folder just didn't survive long enough, but keep it in mind all the same. Actually, on that note, I probably should have mentioned this earlier as well. I already brought up earlier that here in blue, the Omega Navis are a very good opportunity to use the Hull into Dark Aura into Sanctuary combo to have some absurd defenses. The Omega Navis are by and large the best opportunity in the game in Battle Network 3 White to do the Bodyguard into Navi Recycle combo, as that'll kill them just outright in most cases, because that would be 3,600 HP's worth of hits. None of these guys have that much health. So you can just use that to completely melt a lot of these health bars down very quickly. You need to, of course, get your way through the folder to do so, but since you don't have to worry about busting rank, it doesn't really matter in that regard. In a way, I guess I could phrase my biggest problems with a lot of this post-game as bloat in terms of how many times you have to fight certain things. But if there's something I'll give it at the same time, the arsenal you get by the end of the post-game can be so ridiculous that you more than have the tools to deal with 90% of stuff. The big issue at that point comes down to your reaction times, or how good you are at reading what's about to happen next. Because the in-the-moment spontaneity of dodging can be the bottleneck in that regard, depending on what kind of player you are. And honestly, in that regard, having a shield style around is almost always good because you can reflect a good amount of attacks using that still. But again, that still requires a little bit of reaction time to use that, but it's at least something. That's Serenade out of the way though, but there's no secondary Serenade chip, you just get an extra 10,000 Zenny for that. We're not done with the Omega viruses and Navis yet though. There is one left to get. Still here in Secret Area 3 even. We want to head over to the other side of Secret Area 3's map and head back to the monolith we broke that was hiding Hub Batch behind it. The final Omega Navi and their viruses are located over there, and you can process of elimination what we're about to fight pretty easily. So I really recommend healing up using any full energies you have and saving, because in a lot of regards what we're about to do is probably the hardest fight in the game. As not only is the fight itself hard, but again, 3 rounds of Omega viruses before it, so it's very easy unless you actively dedicate some of your folder to healing to enter this with very low health. And, well, to look at the damage numbers of one of the attacks the upcoming boss fight can do, 500 on one of their attacks, that is half your health at max without using NaviCust programs. So you're in for a lot. Because if you've paid attention, all that remains is base Omega. 3,000 health, a quickly regenerating 200 strength life aura. You need to do a lot of damage to this guy to even be able to actually damage him. Proto Man is very good in this fight for that alone because it's a quick shot to the barrier, but at that point you need to focus on making sure he can't regenerate it. I believe I mentioned this during the GS fight, and maybe even the fight at the endgame of the story. But Base tends to only really quickly regenerate his aura if you let him get off a Buster Rake at all, once you've taken it down. So if you're good about stunning him and keeping the damage flowing, you don't have to worry a lot about it regenerating. But eventually he will just put it back up anyway, no matter what. So keep your damage consistent, keep it quick, and you should probably take him down relatively quickly, but his damage output is so high that if there's an Omega Navi I can see people dying to very regularly no matter the playstyle, it's of course going to be Base. Also, hey, we actually got to see him use the Gospel Head this time. We didn't get to see that during the BassGS fight, if memory serves. Yeah, I really like that they did that. Cool way to kind of bring Base and Treble back together, given that Rush and Treble don't exactly exist as standard entities in the Battle Network Star Force side of the franchise. Well, at least in the games, Rush got to be a lot more of a major character in the anime that he appeared with any kind of regularity, really. Gospel/Treble, a lot less so, but that's because final boss means special fight, you know? Mind you, Base was also relatively different in their origins in the anime to begin with, because the anime is really cool, but it gets really weird, but also I really love it. Navi recycling into Bodyguard again. We'll do a lot here, because that'll still kill him in like 2 attacks if you can get that out quickly. I remember I was cursing myself out while recording right about here, because at this point I should be using Beastman right now to get the hit in to make sure he didn't finish his Buster Rake, but because he did, he got his aura back up. So if I didn't have an attack like Proto Man ready, I would be shit out of luck and this would be a failed attempt at the boss fight. Again, that's how quickly things can go south in this. You can be completely fine for most of it, but One small misplay can completely set up the pattern to be wrong. Okay, that's his big attack. That's the one I think that does 500 damage. Thankfully, I dodged it because, Metagel? 10,000 Zenny once again, no direct chip for beating base Omega, but that means we've now defeated every single Omega Navi in the game. So if we take a save and do a soft reset, we now have all 7 completion stars, a whole rainbow of completion. But would you believe we're still not done yet? We still have 10 minutes left for a reason. There are still technically 2 things to show off. To go after one first, let's take a look at my library really quick. Note that Base Plus is the second chip in my GigaChip library. It'd be Base over in BN3 White. And now I want to go face a battle. Why? Well, I have a Game Shark code active right now. In specific, one that changes the end of battle reward to a specific chip, like what I did earlier in this LP for the Punk battle chip. And if you've watched the prior 2 LPs in this series, the BN2 Redo and Operate Star Force, like I've done for prior event-exclusive battle chips. The chip we're looking for is not accessible through normal means, but I still want to show it off. By inputting this code in conjunction with either version's master code, BaseGS will be your reward, which in some regards can be considered the ultimate GigaChip, still X-coded like Base's other chips. In fact, if you look at the library when you get it, it actively replaces Base or Base Plus in the library. It doesn't replace it in your pack, but it does replace it in the library. BaseGS is ridiculous. I forget if you actively need a Dark Hole active for it. I did this out of just pattern at this point. But when you use it, Base uses the Vanishing World attack he used on us in that boss fight there, destroying the entire row of panels in front of him and the 2 columns in the middle of that, doing 700 damage by default to anything on screen. It's disgusting. I love it. But now it's time for us to save, because it's time for our actual last task in the game. The last thing we need to do is go refight the final boss. And now, I did this in my Operate Star Force and BN2 redos, but that was largely for a sense of finality and showcasing any post-game images and all that. In this game, moving forward in the series, and even into Star Force, after you've 100%ed everything else, the final boss gets a notable power-up, and thus that is our final challenge. But before we actually get to our powered-up alpha, we have to refight the original Base, whose 1,000 HP is looking rather small now that we've seen all the stuff in the post-game, isn't it? Something about this has always just felt kind of funny, but also kind of mean, like, alright, gotta fight the angry child. Alright, Bubble Man, blow up like half his health. There is something just oh so deliciously petty about using who is probably the at least most pathetic member of World 3 in this game to do that much damage to Base. I love the numbers in this series for that exact reason. You can just do some absurd stuff with characters that you really probably shouldn't be able to do that with. With Base out of the way, it's time for our actual last challenge. We've fought the Alpha. We've fought the Omegas. But the time has come for the Alpha Omega. A whopping 3,000 health on top of their already regenerating HP shield around their core means you're in for a long one. With that said, you can take some pretty good advantage of the Shake battle chip line in this fight to just not only eat through the core, but take some pretty good quick shots at the core. I tried my best to not use cannons in this fight because going that route would be a little cowardly at this point after everything else we've been through. Something to note, though, is that Beastman's actually pretty much completely useless in this fight, as the arms will shield the core unless they're actively swinging at you. Largely, this is just a damage upgrade to the fight. There's only really one new attack, and that's a golden variant of the Claw Swipes, where the vertical one will actually area seal from you. Meanwhile, the horizontal one will break the row that goes along. And that can be devastating in its own regard when you partner it with the shoulder cannons or the eye laser attack that completely breaks a lot of panels. On top of the alpha arm attacks it uses, where it either fires lightning at you in repeated patterns of central row, top and bottom row, or the giant missile that blows up the entire back half if it doesn't hit you outright. This fight can get some pretty high damage at you very quickly. With that said, while it is very tanky and has the regenerating HP shield, since it doesn't have a life aura, you can effectively just charge shot it down if you're good about dodging its attacks well enough if you run out of your folder. So it is ultimately still an easier fight than Base Omega. It helps that there's no Omega viruses to really plow through first. Sure, there's Base default to get through, but at this point, that's a joke of a fight. I think this is a very good way to cap off one of these games, difficulty-wise. As a nice little farewell to the journey itself, while also keeping things kind of familiar. With that said, some of the other games in this series with these exact types of fights definitely get a little bit too high on the HP field. I was so sad I technically messed up that specific use of Bubble Man, but oh well. In a couple of regards, you can look at this specific health bar as a good representation of Battle Network 3's post-game itself. It's chunky as hell, and sometimes if you take even a little bit off, it feels like 4 things more regenerate in front of it. But as long as you keep chipping away at it, you will eventually get through it, because you can just get better at what you do at every step. The dragon is defeated. Oh, I'll get into my thoughts on the overall experience of the post-game and the overall package in a moment, but one thing to note, there is still one last Giga Chip left to talk about, and you get it for defeating Alpha Omega. If you load into your save file after the credits and check your pack, it'll be at the top. Depending on your version, you'll either get Alpha Arm Omega or Alpha Arm Sigma. Omega is what you get here in Battle Network 3 Blue. In that one, Alpha spawns in the center of your field and fires the missile forward down the middle row. If it's an enemy, it explodes like a spreader. If it doesn't and misses, it hits the back row, the back 2 columns get exploded for the listed 500 damage. Meanwhile, over in Battle Network 3 White, there's Alpha Arm Sigma, which looks like it does less damage, but that's because in that one, Alpha will spawn in the middle of your area and then fire the lightning beams they can do in the boss fight, which hits the central row 16 times and the edge rows 8 times each, so 400 damage for the top and bottom row and 800 for the middle. That's really good. Battle Network 3's post-game on the whole is frankly exhausting even compared to BN 1 and 2's, as there's just so much. And I admit, I did like it better this time than the last time I did it, but that's because I had the foreknowledge of sticking with a style change to get the exclusive battle chips to it first so I don't have to grind for the style change again afterwards, or I knew where to look for very specific things. On a first run and even on a repeat run, this is at times just far too much game for its own good, and I get why it's that way. It was meant to be the last game, so they wanted to have a big final farewell in that regard, and I respect that. But in a world where BN4 Beyond exists, it definitely can feel out of nowhere in terms of the scale of it. And in that regard, they did technically kind of try to follow up on it on the scale of Battle Network 4's post-game, let alone Battle Network 5's. And while I have my issues with both of those, I would much rather go through those again, as well they have their own extreme structural failures in my eyes. It's nowhere near as tedious a grind to me as some of the stuff gets to be in BN3's post-game. And that's a shame to say that, because there's a lot of really cool stuff in it. The new boss fights alone are really cool. The secret area is visually gorgeous, and I love the music. And some of the post-game exclusive strategies you can really start running are really fun to do, but there's just so much to get to that and get to the end of it that I can't easily recommend it to anyone who likes doing post-games. God forbid I ever get the Legacy Collection on my console and actually want to get all the trophies, because that's a lot of this stuff over and over again. Also worth noting, I actually had to go fight Alpha Omega again, because when you first beat them, you don't have Alpha Arm Sigma yet, so that comes across as 285.19 rather than 285.20. Bit annoying, but quick fix. Congratulations! Thank you for your super play. Notably, this image isn't actually in the Western release. I went and downloaded a save file off GameFAQs again to fight the Japanese version's final boss to show this. They had to remove this from the Western release on the Game Boy Advance, I'm assuming for cartridge space reasons, just like with the different jacking animation, the title screen animation, and the NaviCust animation. A little annoying that had to happen, but oh well, it's at least in the Legacy Collection release, so you can see it nowadays in the West. But that's finally the end of Battle Network 3. It's been a long project, and I'm glad I did it, but I am exhausted of Battle Network at the moment, so I don't want to immediately go into Battle Network 4 as the next celebratory LP for all that jazz. But we're going to stay pretty adjacent to it. I've been doing Let's Plays for over 13 years now, and I have yet to touch Star Force, so that's going to be what we do next. Obviously, we're very late into the video to even say this note, but thank you guys so much for 540 subs. I know we're at 610 now. I'm trying to catch up, but editing these takes a lot. But considering we're going into non-post-game next on a different game, I should hopefully be able to get those out at a faster pace and catch up sooner. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great night. Take care. And I'll see you guys next Let's Play, whatever that may be. See you guys then.